Hello, everyone who's listening online. You've probably been listening to approximately 7 minutes of white space as part of that. That's okay. But part of the reason you've got white space is that we've actually been doing an introduction. So the closest we've got to that, if you're listening to this as a recording, is the discussion board. It's a great place to be able to meet as part of that process. Now, I just want to double check that screen sharing is happening. Because I've switched, yeah, it should. So hello, everyone. I reckon that's the camera over there.
Yeah, that's a camera.
Hello.
It's just holding.
I feel like I'm just trying to break in. Maybe that one. Hello. Hello. It's one of those two as part of it. I will warn this group here that as sunset goes down at the moment, you're likely to get a bit of sunlight in your eyes. Karma's part of that. So welcome, everyone. Welcome to week 2. Today we're going to be doing navigating sustainability obligations, commitments and expectations. So it kind of builds on a little bit of the stuff that you've done in impact assessment and also done in integrated as part of that process. And we're going to have a little bit of fun today trying to understand all of the sustainability obligations that Alkimos has. Now, we had a great presentation last week from Shanna who talked about, the environmental obligations onto it. So that should have been a really good hint as to where to be looking as part of that. But today is your opportunity, after I've given this bit of a lecture, to actually explore where they are, because you're going to be needing to do that kind of process for your assignment tasks. So I want to do a bit of a recap, but before I do a recap, if my clicker works, I did want to let you know about a couple of events. So you would have seen an announcement, I think, that came out overnight about the careers fair next Wednesday. If you are doing integrated, I would recommend that you book for the morning session because, of course, integrated is here in the afternoon as part of that. It is a great opportunity for you to get out and see what employers are hiring in not just the environment space, obviously that's important for us, but to talk to them. Many of them will be talking about their graduate programs. So if this is your last year and you have 2 semesters to go, graduate programs will start advertising now. And in fact, the ability to apply for graduate programs usually drops off after about April or May. And that's because it can take 8 or 9 months to go through the process. Like, it's a super slow process as part of that. So if you're graduating at the end of this year, you need to be looking for that job now, because that's how long it can take as part of that process. The week after that is Global Thinkers Week. Now, I'm going to admit, I don't know if we've ever had this before. I don't really know anything more than that's on this slide at the moment, but there is a whole bunch of stuff going on associated with Global Thinkers Week and other events in the next few weeks at ECU Joondalup. Some of them are available online. I'm not 100% sure if any of them are here at City Campus, but there's lots of opportunities for you to participate in things. I think overnight I also posted about She Can Lead, which is a session being delivered by the WA Climate Leaders Network on Sunday. Sunday is International Women's Day, and they're going to be talking about climate impacts and climate change from a whole bunch of different perspectives. That's at the Subiaco Arts Centre as part of that. And it sounds like a great forum. I'm actually really looking forward to hearing some really good speakers. Gina Williams, who's a local Noongar singer, a beautiful voice, sings in Noongar. has amazing reputation globally as part of it. Mary Fatton, who leads the Climate Leaders, I think is hosting the event. And there's also DJs on afterwards. So if you want a bit of an experience of Western Australia, we would call that a Sunday session, usually done at a pub. But, you know, theatre centre will be able to be done as well as part of that. So a whole bunch of events going on as part of those processes. So please have a think about some of those. So the recap, now it's going to get warm. Recap last week is, as most units do, a lot of admin, talking about the way we approach the unit, what are the learning outcomes I want you to achieve. So what do I want you to get out of this unit? We introduced the assessments, and I wanted to clarify that the topic you do your induction on has to be the topic you choose for the other assessment tasks. So the best place to start is looking at the management plan instructions, then look at what you need to do for the induction, and then you probably don't really need to think about the report until around the time you submit your management plan. We also talked about the three kind of dominant definitions, or four common dominant definitions of sustainability. One of them is the triple or the quadruple bottom line as part of that. We also talked about the Sustainable Development Goals. Excellent, it is recording. I just had a panic then. And we also talked about ESG, because in the time that I've been at ECU, so 6 years now, there's been this massive shift in some sectors away from using the word sustainability. What might that be? It's got a lot of letters in it. Even I have trouble spelling it. My most misspelt word ever. There's lots of different definitions. That's why there's a shift away from it. It's also got lots of different connotations associated with it. So what a business might consider to be a sustainable business might have more to do with the fact they have more money coming in the door than they have going out the door. That's genuine sustainability in that context. It might be about the ability for a project to develop something and to have the resources, not just the money, but the people resources to keep it going. So it doesn't always mean the kind of sustainability that I'd like it to mean as part of that. So ESG has provided a bit of clarity, particularly in the resources and the oil and gas sector. But we are seeing a subtle shift, and we'll talk more about that today as part of that. So if you didn't work it out last week, sustainability is and will probably always be a wicked problem. And a wicked problem is a problem where there are numerous issues. They are all individually very complex. It's also difficult to define, hence my slides there. Lots of stakeholders, thousands of them on some situations when you're talking at a country level. Globally, if we talk about sustainability at a global level, you're talking about whatever the entire population of the planet is at this point in time. And what we know about wicked problems is that traditional solutions, the way we've always done things, haven't worked. So why would we keep doing the things we know haven't worked and expect a different outcome? You wouldn't. So wicked problems are very complex. I always have these last two bullet points, and I think it's the optimist in me. I think that there are many challenges that still are remaining. They are vast, but we are seeing a shift. We are mostly seeing that shift not from government. We're seeing it from people and we're seeing it from corporations, but governments are typically slower to respond. Have a think about it in your own context. Would you consider the government from the country that you come from or you have a cultural connection to, would you consider that they have managed sustainability? Geez, I was looking for a field trip, just hoping someone would say yes. For some of you, you've been here a year or more in Australia. Do you think Australia is doing a good job to solve those problems at the government level? Maybe better than other countries, and we came to that yesterday, but still not perfect. And in fact, at the International Women's Day presentation today, the speaker, Pearl Proud, actually talked about the fact that in growing up in South Africa, one of the things that inspired her was the United Nations. So I kind of put her on the spot and said, you know, we've got 4 years left of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. How are we getting there? You know, do you think we'll achieve the gender equity SDG 5 target? And she said, I think we need to stop thinking about the next 4 years and think beyond that. I thought that was a great solution because in reality, we will not achieve the SDGs. We've had 15 years, we've got some progress, but vast challenges remain. But if we only think as far as 2030, planet's doomed. Yeah. So we need to think beyond that. And I thought it was actually an excellent piece that she presented on as part of that. So that's a bit of a summary. The next probably not quite hour, 50 minutes or so, I want to talk about navigating sustainability obligations and the commitments, the complexity associated with it, because it is complex. And as you prepare for your induction, as you prepare your sustainability management plan, you're going to need to think about these in relation to the topic that you have chosen as part of that. To face it clearly. So I think I had a similar slide maybe last year in Integrated. I can't quite remember. I probably stole it from this slide. But this talks about the fact that expectations, obligations, and commitments are three interlinked concepts, and they are subtly different, even though at the everyday people's language perspective, we probably treat them as exactly the same as part of it. In our universe, an obligation is a must do. If you think back to ISO 14001, an obligation is a legal and other requirement. Now, there might be other requirements that they can't list all of them because the other requirements could include voluntary situations. So things like ISO 14001, IWA 48, which we'll introduce today. It could be codes of practice that are part of the normal expectation of that sector. So I think in Integrated, I talk about the mine closure planning type situation, contractual requirements, what the asset owner or an organisation says to its suppliers or its contractors you must do, and other agreements it might have signed as part of it. So that's quite complex. Now, to be honest, for some of the topics that are available in this unit for you to look at, and for Alkimos, we do not have the contractual documents. As much as the team probably like me at Alkimos, contracts are commercially sensitive documents. I couldn't even find, because I was never involved with a team bidding on this project, I've never even seen what the proposed contractual terms are, but I could probably have a pretty good guess about what they might be. And they'll absolutely have things like, you must get a sustainability rating. Shen basically referred to that last week. Then we have commitments. And commitments are a promise. And they're often promises made to the public or to an asset owner or to customers. We are committed to. And that commitment might become an obligation if it's entered into a contract or it's used in an environmental approval document or a planning approval document. It may become an obligation as part of that process. They're usually documented. The trickiest commitments are the ones where somebody associated with the organisation or the project or the government stands in front of people and says, we are committed to. Because unless there was a journalist there to film it, it's probably not documented. And in fact, there are plenty of examples in the sustainability space of where that's happened. Then you have down the bottom this thing called expectations. And expectations are what people on the outside would be expecting the project or the organisation to do, even if they don't have a legal obligation about it, even if they don't have a commitment. It is just the way things are expected to happen in that particular sector. And the infrastructure sustainability rating scheme started off in that expectation space. If you're listening to this from New South Wales, for a while, I'm not sure about current projects, but for a while it appeared in environment and planning approval requirements to do that. It probably does appear as a contractual obligation for ASDP as part of that, but as a major infrastructure project, there would be an expectation in those circles in the major infrastructure development space that a rating would be sought, whether there was a contractual requirement or not as part of that. Sometimes that does come indirectly from some of these voluntary codes of practice, or it might be because it's so well aligned with other things that organisations have to do. It's just a great way to get a piece of formal recognition for what you are going to have to do anyway. So to explain what that means, imagine when you finish your degree here, you don't get to go to graduation ceremony, you don't get a certificate to put on your wall. All you get is well done. Who would like that? I don't like that, Tossin. Why? But you've done it. You worked hard for it. You've done it. You can be proud of that. You need evidence. Why? Don't you think employers will trust you when you say, yeah, I've done that? No. And I think I've shared this story. I can't remember whether I shared it last week or whether I've shared it with some of you before, but what now seems like a million years ago when I worked on the Roe Highway Extension project, or Roe 8, I had the project director say to me, I need to be able to make a statement so the media, or so the minister can say to the media, this is going to be the most sustainable project ever. I believe that. But at that time, we had no way of externally documenting that. No certificate, no transcript or testament, nothing. You just have to trust me. And even back then, I'm pretty sure the minister would not have said, look, Kat might say so, but that ain't going to pass what we colloquially call the pub test. You need something from the outside as part of the process. So maybe it's going to work, maybe it's not. We'll see how it goes. The complexity comes in because of just the way things are. So Alkimos Desalination Project is being delivered by the Alkimos Seawater Alliance, ASWA. ASWA consists of a few different organisations. Acciona, who, if you exit this building and you look at Yagan Square and you look toward the north, you'll see their head office as part of that. They are a global company. Their headquarters is in Spain. Because they're in the UK, they probably have sustainability-related obligations that they have to think about, even for projects in this tiny little capital city the most isolated capital city in the world, in this tiny little, few billion-dollar project, which is, 40 or 50 kilometres away from the most isolated capital city in the world. I guarantee before they won that project, nobody in the Acciona head office even knew where Alkimos was. Now, I think actually Alkimos comes from a name from maybe Spain or Italy or something. There was some connection for it. So maybe they might have thought that it was over there. But they certainly wouldn't have been thinking about, what it might mean here. But the people here would definitely have needed to know about what they need to think about from the global level. They have to also comply with commitments, obligations and expectations at the country level. So at Australian level, at the state level, at the local government, and I think that they'd been the city of Wanneroo, so obligations associated with things particularly like noise, which is a sustainability consideration. They have to consider that. Then they've got whatever Acciona has said, and I think in 2 weeks' time, we'll actually have a look at Acciona's sustainability policy. You might like to think about that when you're doing the activity today. They've also got the Water Corporation one. Their delivery partners in the alliance will also have obligations on wherever their head office is. My brain hurts already. And they've got the project obligations. So being able to identify these and map them out actually starts to become a little bit challenging. And it all depends on the where is it located, what are they doing type situation as to what may or may not apply, but very complex as part of it. So let's start with the easy stuff. I'm going to call it the easy stuff, the global context. Come on, Elsie. There you go. So, international obligations as they relate to sustainability are often dominated by the environment. So all those things that you would have learned about in every other unit you've done before now, and some that you might not have learnt about, but others might have learnt about, and some that actually I don't think we cover anywhere. Nuclear materials. Now, Acciona probably doesn't have any nuclear materials. It might be using some radioactive materials to do some things, but it's not like it's going to put them on a boat and ship them overseas. So it's okay. Hazardous waste, particularly the transfer of wastes anywhere. Oceans, treatment of oceans is definitely an issue for Alkimos. Definitely needs to think about climate change and biodiversity as part of that. But it also needs to think about the other dimensions of sustainability. Now, I've deliberately left the economic side of things out of this because for a project like Alkimos, except where they're buying components from overseas, so for example, the actual desalination technology, the vast majority of their benefits and impacts to the economy are here. They're local jobs. They're local capacity building as part of that. But what they really need to be conscious about are things like human rights, the Indigenous rights of the Aboriginal people of the Whadjuk nation that we are on at the moment, and as Shen talked about last week, cultural heritage. And cultural heritage, even though they said they didn't know of any, they still have the potential to make unexpected finds in relation to those things. Now, usually, international obligations are so woven into legislation at the country level, the project or the organisation don't need to worry about them, because we have this cascading effect as part of it. And Angus may still use that slide in impact assessment, I'm not sure, but around the different scales of things as part of it. Where they need to think about international obligations is where there's offshoring So for some organisations, even one's being delivered in Perth, the actual work that's getting done, doing drawings that they use to build it, perhaps the manufacture of components happens overseas. So things like human rights and whatever those localised impacts on these areas need to be thought at, not at the country where it's working or where it's being delivered, but across country borders. And that's where it becomes really challenging. So in organisations that I've worked with, they would have these high-value design centres where we would offshore, send work off from Australia to China, Vietnam, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, to help provide employment for other countries and other locations. But we would need to make sure that they were complying not only with whatever the human rights and employment requirements were there, but also here. And in fact, modern slavery, which is a deep dive topic that'll be released tonight, is one particular example of where human rights violations really do have a material impact on organisations as part of that process. Now, it gets quite complex. So you can see, okay, by the time you finished your master's or your graduate diploma, some of the left-hand column you'll be okay. You will have done touch points for the Australian context for Indigenous cultural heritage. We have only really mentioned in passing Indigenous land rights and what that might mean. I've never covered human rights in any of my classes. And I've never seen unis do it outside of law degrees. Maybe in anthropology you probably would have done, sociology would have done aspects of it.
Human rights and social injustice.
Excellent. Everyone's going to be wanting to talk to you about social justice. It's a really interesting topic. For us in Australia, we now have modern slavery legislation, yet we still have a massive problem with modern slavery. And that is very pervasive, regrettably. Payment of staff, imposing of conditions on people that are outside of legislation, tying people to employment contracts or situations because those people need work, but they are illegal in this country. And then we have ones offshore. So probably about 8:30 or something, the dive deeper modern slavery materials will be released. This draws largely on the Supply Chain Sustainability School, who've been great in this sector at educating in that particular space. So wouldn't be me if I didn't talk about climate change. It's also probably the most widely recognised international obligation. But this applies for, in principle, ideas are the same for all of them. So the Convention on Biodiversity, things like Ramsar protection as part of that. But for climate change, the Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC, is around countries and thereby the enterprises within them working collectively to reduce emissions, to adapt to climate change impacts and to address climate change. I don't want to get you depressed in week 2, so we're going to explore that a little bit later in semester as part of it. And in fact, when we talk about the net zero trajectory, we're really going to be talking around this because that is not being driven by governments. It's being driven by the community saying we need to be doing something. And we've seen how that works. Montreal Protocol on ozone protection, we've seen it around biodiversity preservation, people power matters as part of that. You said you were moving. There you go. Sustainable development goals are also complex and interrelated. So in Australia, we're definitely starting to see organisations like the Infrastructure Sustainability Rating Scheme and others, West Australian Government through some of the ESD ESG statements it's made saying, wow, we're a bit behind, probably need to do something. So let's actually set them. And in 2 weeks, we will definitely be looking at how do we take this big picture idea of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and for Alkimos, how do we, A, understand how they've done it, and B, look at what it might look like for us so that you can apply that for your projects as part of that. It's going to be really slow today, I can see that. So, in case you missed it last week, the SDGs really are a vision. They're a blueprint about a better future for everyone. So kind of blending on the Brundtland definition of sustainable development. They're not legally binding. Not all countries have committed to them, but they're expected to deliver on them. Some of the goals or the sub-goals are not applicable to everywhere. Some are very, very focused on particular things. So it makes them challenging. Now, I'm old enough to remember what we had before the SDGs. We had the MDGs, and this was our target at the millennium. So 2000. You guys, was everyone born before? Okay. Well, in the year 2000, we had this thing called the Millennium Development Goals, a smaller number of goals. The Millennium Development Goals were really focused around Africa and other developing countries to try and help countries address the challenges of becoming more advanced, economically developed societies. The focus around Africa was really around HIV/AIDS and maternal health as part of that, but that also applied across the board. They were not really aimed at countries like Australia, the US, most of Europe, the UK. But what we realised is actually if we don't fix the problems everywhere, we solve the problem for no one. So the SDGs came out of that as part of it. Oh, go back. No, it's too fast. Now, in terms of other things at a global scale, we have my favourite standard suite, the 14,000 family, which covers a whole range of different standards to help support environmental management. And I love it for a few reasons. If you actually look at this and if you get really close to the screen, so you guys, the front half here, these three might be okay. Yeah, you guys have got no chance of reading that. Oh, you can see it on there, Vincent. Excellent. What that suite shows us is actually we have been using the environmental management family for sustainability for a long time. So in addition to EMS, which we'll talk about shortly, there's the life cycle assessment side. There's things around environmental labels and disclosures that are happening. There's things around, this painful subject called water, waste, energy. They're really, really useful as part of it. In fact, I think in the next slide, I gave you a list of my favourites. Oh no, one after that, I gave you a list of my favourites. Key to all of these is 14,001, and you'll probably remember when we get to that in integrated that I talk about the fact that the word environment on the front of the standard is a bit of a misnomer, because right in the first section, it talks about the fact that the driver behind it is around a commitment to sustainability. It's the environment, society, and the economy. Sounds like sustainability to me. Could be wrong. Sounds like it to me. So it actually gives us a framework to be able to use and to take a really systematic approach to how we venture into addressing these challenges in the environment, easy, in society, and in the wider economy as part of that. Now, I go with a mouse. These are some of my favourite. I think on my computer or on my OneDrive account more appropriately, I think I have 50 standards that I use at least a couple of times a year. Some I actually use more than that. And it's not uncommon for me to want or need to buy a new standard every couple of months as part of that, because there are just so many of them. And the thing that standards give us is a consistent set of language, a consistent structure, and a consistency that means it doesn't matter if you're doing it in Bangladesh, if you're doing it in Perth, if you're doing it in Madrid, in Florida, in Lima, or in Antarctica. The ideas are the same. The local context is obviously different, but they can apply quite widely. And in fact, most of the standards that I use have started to go beyond the 14,001 standard in recognition that we really need to think about things more broadly, so the social dimension. And you can see in the 20s, so 2400, which we have a deep diver module in a couple of weeks. I forget which module unit I attached it to. We've got ones around sustainability in buildings. So this building, I am absolutely certain would have considered 21928, and I'm pretty sure, in fact, I could ask the team delivering it, that they would have thought about 20887 for end of life. Makes sense. Now, I tend not to use 32210 very often. I downloaded it and used it to try and understand aspects of that a few years ago. I probably look at it once or twice a year. A million years ago, I used to use the the energy management system standards when I taught in the renewable energy sector as part of that. So they're very handy to be able to use. Now, you would have seen in the lead up to today, so the pre-work, if you will, I gave you instruction on how to use Accurus to be able to get access to view those standards. It's handy to have a look at them. Even search, if you did a Google search to find out what other standards are around, or you even went to ISO, the ISO website, and had a look at what ones they've got in development, you'll see that there's a lot of effort trying to go to make things easier for countries all around the world. Last year, I think a few weeks into semester, a friend of mine told me about this new ESG guidance. And me being a sustainability person, didn't frequently use the term ESG. I would never have Googled for ESG. But this guideline, the IWA 48, is kind of like a tailored version of environmental management standard specifically for sustainability contexts. So in fact, instead of 14,001 in this semester, we're really going to use this particular document. And we're going to think of ESG as being within the context of our definition, so not the corporate or the business model approach as part of it. And interestingly, 48 actually gives yet another definition of sustainability. And if you look at it, it kind of looks like it's got a bit of plagiarism going on with it. Can you see where the plagiarism might be?
Last week's definition.
Brundtland definition at the bottom. So this is actually the standards way of trying to take a definition which is actually really hard in practice to do something with and actually turn it into something workable. So we're actually going to be using this throughout semester. And I think I put instructions on Canvas that to download this now, as opposed to in the past, it comes up with a really boring 1998 version of a website and a pop-up box and ask you to put your email address in it. Just make sure you only tick the last box, the terms and conditions. Otherwise, if you tick one of the first two, you'll get drowned in ISO standards emails as part of that, but you will need it all semester. It is free. I love that because if we didn't provide 14,001 for integrated, it would cost you $300 to buy that standard. it's expensive. So I love the fact that ISO have thought this is actually so important, we're going to make it available. We're at 6:15. We haven't even got past the globe yet, so I probably need to hurry on. So, Australian context. Now, I think a couple of these slides, one here and one in the WA context, I'm probably one of the few old-timers that even remember these things exist. So in 1992, which was my first year at university, the federal government released the National Strategy for ESD, Ecologically Sustainable Development. It technically still exists, but the only organisation I've ever found that still uses it is the National Capital Authority, and that's a fancy name for saying the people who are responsible for doing development, urban development in the ACT or around Canberra. I've certainly not seen it used in the WA context ever, but it still in theory exists. It's interesting, but it's actually focused only on the ecological dimension of environment. It's not even a broad definition. So it doesn't care about noise pollution, doesn't care about heritage. It just cares about plants and animals and processes associated with that. Of course, we've talked about the EPBC Act. EPBC Act, I will argue, except with Angus, till the cows come home, that I think the EPBC Act and actually the EP Act in WA are sustainability legislation as part of that. We have other things like the National Construction Code, which this building would have had to have been built in accordance with. That NCC, since it changed from the Australian Building Codes, or maybe it's the other way around, maybe it might be the Building Codes now. No, it was Building Codes before that. They've changed over time. So actually what would be considered a super energy efficient building against the old versions of those codes would now be considered unacceptable under the current version. So for example, our escalators here, a new building installing escalators has to install the most energy efficient ones available. Old ones are not allowed. The Australian Accounting Standards Board talks about reporting requirements. We talked about that last week around corporate reporting as part of that. And the other two big ones are the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Act, the Climate Change Act. There are also things like the Modern Slavery Act that we've talked about as part of that. There's also EPBC covers heritage aspects, so a lot of those other social dimensions. Brains full yet? Still got more to go. So here's a question for you to think about as we go through the next set, because this is something that will frame the activity. And that's, here are their expectations on an organisation or a project that aren't obligations. So have a think about that as we go through the next slides and into the activity today. While I'm doing that, I want to talk to you about here and now. Now, if you're outside of Western Australia, I've very specifically given the West Australian context, but equally, I think most of the external students are based in Victoria today, Victoria or South Australia. There are different contexts to that, but they're usually the same kinds of places. And those places really sit in the environment and planning and heritage. Now, remember how I said that when I started the NSED slide, that there was these two places of things that everyone's forgotten about? This is the other one. So seriously, what was a million years ago? September 2003. The state government here wrote Hope for the Future, which is this particular document. It was the WA State Sustainability Strategy. Now, in 2003, so 2003, that was pretty progressive. Unbelievably progressive, actually, as part of it. I probably think there would be 5 of us still working in sustainability that even remember it exists. One of them would have been the author. the original author as part of that, and they're close to or have recently retired. So we don't tend to talk about it. It still technically exists. Like, no one said we've got a new one. No one said we're going to ignore it. It's kind of like that present that the family member you don't like very much gave you and you hate. So you put it in the bottom drawer until you can give it away. It, like the NSESD, actually didn't achieve anything. It had some great things. So when it came out, the ability to establish a Sustainability Act, EP Act, Sustainability Act. That would have been amazing. So when we think about sustainability, for a very long time in WA, any of our definitions of sustainability were really being driven by asset owners. Main Roads in WA was one of the leaders. In Victoria, that was being led largely by the rail sector in Victoria, also in the building sector as part of that. So most of the places that we've actually seen sustainability really being required is in planning type legislation. Makes sense, right? Sustainable development, it's about planning. So the EP Act in WA does cover things. A similarly named EP Act in other states has it. In New South Wales, which is a sector I've worked a lot in, the intersection of the environment and planning legislation is really handy. That's the PDA, or the Planning and Development Act. Heritage Acts as part of that. They're the places that we've tended to see sustainability for us. In Western Australia, that has traditionally very much been the case. And in fact, it's usually rested in what we call the state planning policy. Now, state planning policy really comes into play when the land has been designated one thing and you want to change what that's going to be. So the land that ECU sits on was always commercial building after it stopped being associated with a railway line. That change from railway to commercial development to build Yagan Square required approval from the WA Planning Commission. But the state planning framework is really complex, just like that whole global, Australian, local kind of context. This is kind of the framework. So we have the Act, we have the state planning strategy, then underneath the strategy you have the policies. I'm going to talk about those. Regional and local governments might have their own policies. Then there'll be operational policies. Then there'll be position statements, which is a fancy way of saying policy. But policy in a government context does not mean policy in the way that the Water Corporation one that we're going to look at today means as part of that. And then we have guidelines. Complex. Really complex part of things. So actually, most of the sustainable thinking is done by people who work in the planning sector and the building sector for us. Now, specifically, state planning policies cover really important things. The one connected most to this unit, or the ones are the environment and natural resources, want to protect things. That's where they're not otherwise covered by the EP Act. So if the extent of damage isn't bad enough, if you will, to get an impact assessment, gets covered that. Urban growth corridors and settlement, including aspects of heritage consideration, economic development, transport and transport-related infrastructure, the regional planning and development, making sure that when we plan things, we don't just slop things together like a jigsaw puzzle that you haven't paid attention to the image of. But the most important one when it comes to developments is usually design for the built environment policy. And things like, last year we talked about in this unit the Vic Park level crossing removal, so train stations between Carlisle and Beckenham, and then ultimately all the way to Byford. That had to address that SPP 7 as part of it. Now, there are actually others. There's ones around noise, there's millions of them, but they're really the ones that I tend to have crossed paths with over my journey. We also have the state climate change policy. And I want to leave you with this: is it an obligation or a commitment when you get a chance to have a look at it? And the policy position kind of really maps out what do we want to achieve, the vision, the themes that we're going to do, what are the outcomes we want, and then the action plans as part of it. So it's kind of like a management plan before you get to the management plan. The management plan really is the action section, but you have a big picture side of things sitting above it, an ultimate goal. In the last 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years now, Treasury, you know, the people who collect all the state taxes, if you pay for a driver's license, when you pay with your smart rider, that money goes to the PTA, but then some of that money goes to Treasury. Probably not much, because I think smart rider use doesn't account for the cost of public transport. But Treasury, of all places, came out with the continuous improvement of ESG outcomes in WA. Kind of from nowhere. Now, Treasury are coordinating the whole of government approach. Treasury, people who collect taxes from the state and the people who give out money. Isn't that a bit odd? Why Treasury? Surely the Enviro should lead it, or Heritage, or even better, let's get the Department of Premier and Cabinet to lead it. Money talks. And in fact, probably one of the drivers behind this is that if we want to continue to build things like new city campuses, new whatevers over there, new railway stations, new ports like Westport, new airports, we're going to need private investment funding. And with the exception of 3 or 4 people in Australia, no one's rich enough to be able to pay for that. So we're going to need to go to capital markets, to international markets to get money, the investment sector. And the investment sector are exactly like the oil and gas and the resources sector. The investment sector is really being driven at the moment by sustainable investment, not just money on your returns, but good decision making, carbon reduction initiatives, ones that are addressing modern slavery, ones that are minimising environmental impacts, all of those things. And my guess is because, well, the state sustainability strategy didn't go anywhere, and there was this policy and legislative vacuum for such a long time, that international investors, you know, the really big banks of the world, probably said, why would we give you guys money? You're not doing anything that supports what's important to our clients. So I think this probably came out as a result of that. And it's actually been quite useful because it does have an SDG focus to it in the language that shows what we've actually always been doing, but what we've been doing has been driven by government agencies or individual businesses, not by a whole of government approach to it. So I'm thinking this is a really great perspective. And in fact, I'm hoping that we'll see it come to fruition over the next few years. So then we need to think about the organisational and project context. And I kind of want to talk about this only for about another 10 minutes. And then I'm going to take a break so that anyone who's observing Ramadan can attend an iftar celebration or break the fast as part of that. And then we will kick into our activity. So obligation, commitments, expectations, and the like are really complex. At the sectoral level, so at the water sector, the Alkamos, there's a whole bunch of expectations within that sector, usually driven by peer pressure from the sector. So yes, we only have one other desalination plant. Water Corporation is not being driven by, Busselton Water or the other water agencies in WA. It's being driven by what other water agencies and organisations are doing on the East Coast as part of that. Now, sectoral expectations are usually voluntary commitments. They might include things like sustainability ratings against IS, infrastructure sustainability or Green Star. Neighbours is actually less of a sectoral expectation anymore. I think in capital cities, it's a mandatory requirement. At that big dollar funding level, so international markets and international corporations that might need investment funding or a stock exchange listed, there's a thing called GRESB, came out of the real estate sector, now looks at real estate and infrastructure investment. So we don't have any toll roads in Western Australia, but toll road operators are an example of that. Those expectations are there. And organisations need to work out, are they going to commit to them or are they just going to have it in their back pocket? They probably should be doing something that maybe they're not doing. Then they'll make their own commitments. And those commitments usually are driven around what in our language are called policy statements. So it's impossible to read on this slide, but underneath the organisational column, there's a copy of Water Corporation's environment policy. And that's their commitment to what they want to do, their promise to the community, if you will. Sometimes they have strategies and action plans as part of that. Westport has an ESG policy, and I don't know that there's strategy and action plans, or it has an ESG strategy, which is equivalent to a policy, but policy plus an action plan. Sometimes they're not released publicly. I certainly haven't found that for Water Corporation. A long time ago, they used to have one. It was called Wheels for the Future or something, had wheels in it. It was really quite innovative, but they've not progressed that in recent years. Then at the project level, there's a whole bunch of other things. Management plan obligations, commitments that they've made in impact assessments, which have flown through to ministerial statement, conditions of approval, so they become legal obligations. What Water Corporation has imposed on the Alliance in order to make contractual requirements, what the project has gone to market, community, and said it's going to do, like the targets as part of that. So it's tried to digest in that last project section, or for those of you that choose one of the organisational based topics at the policies and strategies level. Collectively, those things usually reflect all of the international, state and national obligations that they have as part of it. Not always, but usually capture all of that in one place to try and make it a little bit easier as part of that. So I'm going to be honest and say when you're doing that aspect for your sustainability management plan, that portion of work is complicated. For anybody here doing this and integrated, that includes anybody listening online or listening to this as a recording, that is the most complicated thing, working out what is and isn't applicable to an organisation and how it's cascaded. In fact, you'll see I've made a note on this slide saying, I actually think the physics and maths on this slide is less complicated. And it takes time for you to develop. So when you're thinking about your plans, make sure you allow enough time for that. Because by now in your course and as you graduate, that expectation that you'll be able to distinguish between all of the possibilities and what is actually needed is a key skill for an enviro or a sustainability practitioner as part of that. But it does take thinking time. So that's me talking about the complexity of obligations. The TikTok time here is just gone 24 minutes to the hour. I'm going to give you about a 15-minute break because that'll make it easier. So if we say we're coming back at 10 to 7, does that make sense to everyone? Or maybe a few minutes after that, maybe let's make it 5 to 7 because I know some of you will probably want to try and grab a coffee. I don't think any of the cafes are open. May be able to get a takeaway from somewhere across the way, but let's come back and we'll start back in your groups. If all of your group members are back at 10:02, that's great. If not everybody in your group is back, but you feel like you want to get started, we can do. I do want to talk about that activity. So I've had a lot of fun this semester rewriting some activities. And so this is one called Who Says We Have to Do That? And it's an ability for you to try and identify some of the obligations. Now, I've made it a bit limited, so there are only a couple of pieces of evidence or information you need to look at. The ASWA sustainability targets, the Water Corporation Environment and Sustainability website, including their policy as part of that. And the one that's less easy, the Ministerial Statement 1207 as part of that. You might want to divvy reading that one up amongst the partners in the group. I think the other two are relatively easy to do. And I give you the scenario that you have just started working in the team with Shenna and Nata and Will and a young graduate engineer. Any engineers in the room? I think you guys are a couple of engineers. Apologies for this, but engineers come up to you and say, I hear we've got sustainability stuff, but I can't find anything. I want to say that never happens, but it happens a lot. And the reason that I thought this might be a cool activity to do is, A, it starts you thinking about where to find stuff, but it's also the kind of thing you might want to include in an induction. So it links to two aspects or two assessment tasks as part of that. I hope you enjoyed that activity. As I said, we will come back. I definitely want to really get started no later than 5 minutes to the hour. If you're back early or your group chooses to just keep smashing it through, you're more than willing to do so. As a reminder for those of you who are here, my intention is to finish by 8 so that you can try and get whatever respective public transport route you have to get to do that. Hopefully it won't be too dark before we finish this part of that. To everybody online, thanks. Maybe Lewis and Nicholas and Jenny, and I think it looks like Mercy. I can't quite see. I've got my computer glasses on, so being able to tell is a little bit hard from this. But if you just wave goodbye to everyone, and we will see them next week. Where I hope it does